What's up, everybody? Welcome to a special episode featuring my two friends, Shawn and Nick from Pitch Black Sunrise. We've got a discussion panel on the Rock and Roll Gypsy Diaries today. And this was Nick's idea. And this kind of piggybacks off an old video on an old channel I did with the punks and metalheads correlation back in the 80s with the crossover. This is talking about the parallels between what's known as grunge, or the G word in, the media circles, and what's known as stoner rock or stoner doom, which, I'll let Nick get off on this because this has been something we've discussed about doing for a while. So I'll let him start the whole thing.
So my whole trip was this. I was a big 70s rock guy. In the 80s, I was struggling to find something that I enjoyed because I wasn't a big hair guy. I liked some thrash and some stuff like that, but the stuff I really loved was that 70s hard rock vibe,
Yeah,
and
same here.
when the grunge bands came out, I was like, holy shit, this is it. It was a continuation of what I loved, Sabbath and all those bands, Hawkwind or whatever it was,
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And but then they became this very specific genre. And there was, grunge had become so big, it was a media frenzy and it became very commercialized and all that stuff. But there was also these early stoner and doom bands. And there was some in the 80s, like Candlemass, for instance.
Yeah, Tinnitus. I think the Obsessed were in the early 80s too.
I really, even though it's unfortunate what happened, but a band like Iced Earth was very good,
Yeah.
So, and grunge, if you listen to, and I'll use the big four of grunge. So you have Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, and Pearl Jam. And each one of them represents a very specific genre of even grunge, because Nirvana is more of a punk vibe, where Soundgarden is more of a metal vibe, Pearl Jam sort of a hard rock, and Alice in Chains, to me, Alice in Chains was the most doomiest of all of them, because their music is so beautifully dark. The depth of emotion that they reach in that band, especially with Lane, but even after Lane, because I love the last three records are brilliant.
Rainier Fog is great.
Oh my God. Dude, I could talk about that.
I saw them on that tour, and I was really pissed off to see Alice in Chains playing before Korn. That made me want to puke.
Yeah, it is what it is. I don't want to shit talk bands, but it was, they touched on a darkness and a doominess, if you will, more than the others did. But all of them, I mean, like when you listen to bands like Pearl Jam or you listen to Soundgarden, I hear other bands of the stoner era that were coming out in those days, like Monster Magnet, like Sleep, Caius, who else was really big?
Actually, did you know Josh Homme, in between Caius and Queens of the Stone Age, was actually the touring guitarist for the Screaming Trees during the Dust tour?
Yes, I heard that they're very good friends. Yeah.
And I think Mark actually sang on some Queen stuff too.
Yeah, he's big on getting guest stars on his records. So to me, when I started to really get back into, or when I started discovering a lot of the stoner bands, especially the newer ones that were coming out, bands like Clutch, who else? I'm at a loss for, there's so many, so many great ones.
I can remember hearing Dope Thrown by Electric Wizard for the first time and being fucking floored.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Yeah, I mean,
that's not a new standard, I think, in a way.
And
but even that, I've told people, like, people I'd show it to them, and they'd be like, "This sounds kind of grungy," and I'm like, "What?" But I could kind of hear it now with all the fuzzy guitars and stuff. They're just detuned a lot more.
That was, that's the funny thing too, because a lot of the grunge bands used a lot of alternate or drop tunings, which also makes the music sound thicker and bigger and heavier. They caught on with what Sabbath was doing on their middle period records, where they were dropping down to like C sharp and this kind of thing.
Volume 4 is my favorite Sabbath record of all time.
That's why I wore a shirt.
Yugoslavian pressing of that.
That's why I wore a shirt. It was for you tonight. So
thank you.
And if you heard the recent Metallica interview on Howard Stern, they invented drop tuning.
I don't like Metallica.
So.
I mean, not for nothing. drop tunings or alternate tunings was invented by blues guys to play slide and pedal steel. So
When
you
they
know,
were playing 3-string cigar box guitars, that they broke a cigar box and broke a broom handle and put it together because they were too broke.
yeah, and I get a kick out of when they talk about Tony Iommi drop tune because of his fingers. No, that's not why he did it. People have no idea. They should do a little musical history research before they open their mouth. But whatever, we're digressing. So
You did use thinner strings for the fingers in
yeah,
the early days.
yeah. Well, I mean, there wasn't a lot of.
I think their first 2 albums are in standard tuning.
They are.
They are. Yeah. But like again, for me though, it was like when I hear Pearl Jam, I hear Zeppelin and Sabbath, and other bands. I hear Hawkwind. When I hear Soundgarden, I hear Sabbath again too. I hear Zeppelin. We talked about that in the last part of the interview.
I hear a lot of Zeppelin in Soundgarden.
Yeah.
I don't know.
When you listen to Nirvana, you hear the MC5, but you also hear like
There's some Black Sabbath in there.
Yeah, but then you hear bands like Caius who also had a lot of a punk influence in them. I mean,
It almost seems like I almost feel like in a way that I think it's just, I mean, not to sum it up, but I've always kind of felt, and my thought on the comparison was grunge kind of took more of a DIY punk aesthetic, where a lot of the stoner bands were taking more of that 70s proto metal aesthetic in a way, if that makes sense.
That does. That's actually a really good way to put it, man.
But they were but the grunge bands are what's known as the grunge bands. Like, when you had like the 64 Spiders, which is a name that isn't brought up a lot. You had the U-Men, and you had, the early bands like 10 Minute Warning, Green River. They were really into, I think a record that really changed a lot of things for that scene was My War by Black Flag. They really liked their punk rock, but they liked it played slow and urgy.
Yeah. And another great band too, man, Black Flag.
Absolutely.
Oh, and like you said, Green River. I mean, and if you even look at like Pearl Jam, they started out as
Paul Soldier from 10 Minute Warning wrote the music for Rehab Doll by Green River.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Because when if you watch the interview and you listen to some of the music on their Bandcamp from their recent release of Lost Recordings from '84, it's like before Green River started recording or anything really, but you can hear where they really, if there was a ground zero, it would be those recordings by 10 Minute Warning.
Yeah.
Especially since, Paul Soldier wrote the music for Rehab Doll, and the 10 Minute Warning drummer Greg Gilmore played in Mother Love Bone.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
See, I wouldn't want to play Trivial Musical Pursuit with you.
This is all stuff that I've learned within the last year, so I'm still learning. That's part of the thing you got to do. But
you're also a journalist, so you gotta,
Yeah, I was that for 13 years, and now I'm a DJ and doing this because people don't read anymore, man.
But like, if you listen to some of the early recordings of like the really big grunge albums, like 10 or Bad Motorfinger, at that same time, you've got a band like
I've got the Fecal Matter demo by Kurt Cobain on vinyl, which was done in '85 when he was 18 with Dale Crawford.
The market see you coming, bro. They do.
But
no, like if you listen to 10 or Bad Motorfinger or Facelift, at the same time, you had a band like Monster Magnet releasing Spine of God or Dopes to Infinity, or Caius is releasing, Blues for a Red Sun or Welcome to Sky Valley, and just to give two, and or Electric Wizard later on is releasing their first album, and which escapes me now, and it's embarrassing. I can't think of it. Thank you. But these guys could have all been on the same bill, and nobody would have known the difference, And I don't understand how they didn't get caught up in the whole machinery of that movement or that scene, It boggles my mind that a band like Caius is on tour opening for Metallica when they should have been the second to the headliner at Lollapalooza.
I think that the good question is, and we're talking about amalgams of grunge and early stoner and how that the whole thing progressed. So bands like Caius, Monster Magnet, they came out after the grunge era. So that was like what, late 90s. So the grunge era didn't last that long. It was only a couple years.
No, I mean,
really,
the
Well,
film,
no, Caius and Monster Magnet go back to the early 90s.
yeah,
You know,
and so does bands like Cathedral and stuff too.
yeah. Clutch didn't come out until I believe 95 or 96. But even then, I mean,
That's
grunge
still as
was
see, we always think that when Kurt died, that marks the end.
that
But
was 93, you know, and
that was
you know,
94. But
okay.
Hype was filmed a year after. And I think after Hype came out, I think that's when everything started going really downhill. Because 94, 95, that's when you started to have the silver chairs and the bushes and the, you know.
Wait a minute, hold on. Silverchair's first album is fucking insanely good, dude. And they were 16 years old when they did it.
But still, they're cute kids who kind of looked and played like Nirvana. It's kind of sad because no one would take them seriously.
But listen to the riff of Israel's Son, dude.
Oh, I know. I'm not
insane.
bashing Frog Stomp, but I'm just saying, you know, from a record buyer's point of view, it's clear what the industry was doing. And I feel really bad that, maybe some bands that were at one time worth their shit probably weren't.
Now, my other take on the whole thing is this. And I think that there was a linchpin album that everybody seems to forget about that really kind of reinvigorated or restarted the whole stoner retro 70s genre. And it's the album Deliverance by Corrosion of Conformity. Because when you hear the opening riff of Albatross,
yeah,
that's the whole next generation of stoner rock, in my opinion. And they even said when they changed their styles, because if you remember, COC was like a hardcore band originally.
Yeah.
And then when they got Pepper Keenan and they began to change their style and they added more of a Southern rock, Leonard Skinner vibe, they came out with Deliverance. And it was just like, he said the record labels, they didn't even know what to do with the album, but they didn't know where to categorize it.
But it just,
and again, that's to me again, and this is in the middle of grunge.
Yeah.
It really
so Nick's got a good point there, because so I remember being I was early 20s during the whole grunge era. So coming out of high school and going into the military, and that's all we heard. So again, you heard the big four all the time. That's all you heard on the radio. And then Albatross came out, and I remember driving my car to get a haircut in Greenwich, Connecticut, and that fucking song came on, and I was like, holy fuck, what is this? And it was like, it's Black Sabbath all over again. Yeah. Even, and we were talking about Soundgarden before, it always reminded me of Sabbath too, but COC adds
a step further. I would definitely say that, like I said, I think it's because of more of because I mean, in a way, I think the reason why the band's going to fit on the bill together without a problem, unlike a lot of, bands that they emulate, like other than like Sabbath, but like a lot of the 70s hard rock bands like Zeppelin, they had this strong, almost, like the Lemon Song and a lot of sexual innuendos where grunge and even stoner doom and stuff didn't have as much of a need for that, if that makes sense.
The subject
I still feel like, I think the G word, depending on what band, because Mudhoney don't take themselves seriously at all, and I freaking adore them for it.
Great fucking band.
Great fucking band.
Yeah.
But I think the social conscious aspect that also goes into punk and comes from, that, I guess, city kid punk rock thing that, I guess Washington State had at the time. I think that may have been what kind of separated the two, but it seems like such a weak thing to separate because,
Well, not really, because I mean, if you look at Pearl Jam had Black, which is
And Jeremy.
about, yeah, it's a broken heart song type of thing. It's not a love song. It's about, and Alice in Chains has a few, like Love Hate Love, for instance, is a good example.
It's funny that they were a hair band before Soundgarden showed them drop D tuning around it.
I could debate
Know
that
that,
with you
right?
now. Okay.
Have you ever heard any other demos of songs that didn't make it on the facelift?
Alice in Chains originally was their concept, their shtick, if you will, was they came out in drag and did Armored Saint covers, and that was like their early beginnings, and this is before Lane Staley was in the band. I mean, but everybody has their roots. I mean, look at Pearl Jam. Pearl Jam was Mother Love Bone, which was sort of a
Before that, they were Green River.
Right. And then Mother Love Bone is sort of like a hair metal band in a way, because Andrew Wood had that whole giant.
And I talked to Gary about that, because I said, well, weren't they going to be the big band if Andy Wood hadn't died?
Yes,
Gary said,
absolutely.
I don't know, because his like he used to do the mock David Lee Roth thing in small clubs, but when you get to bigger places, the joke doesn't go over quite as well.
You know what? I disagree. I think he was made for arenas.
I think they would have, just because of the era and the climate. But listen, I don't know, at the same time, it might have been too similar to all the stuff going on that people were probably sick of by that point.
No, I think it changed, because you know what? Look at Candlebox. They made it huge in the middle of the grunge era, and they were not grunge. They were a hair metal band.
No.
Well, no. Regardless of how you feel about them,
yeah.
How were they able to get successful with the style of music they played when you had all those other bands where grunge was it, but then there's Candlebox?
Yeah.
How the fuck did that happen? They were just a really good band,
Well, see, the thing is too, and the thing that people always say, and I talked with Gary and many others about it, because I'm friends with a lot of people who weren't exactly big stars, but to me, they matter more than the big stars did.
Sure.
And Gary has a lot of insight, amazingly well. And in the 80s, when hair metal and stuff was mainstream, a lot of the stuff that was being played that later blew up in the early 90s was on college radio. And all those college radio kids, by the time the 90s came around, were out of college. So it more was a natural kind of progression. It wasn't like, anybody had any intentions of killing off the mainstream. I mean, that's bewildering to them to this day. A lot of them,
Yeah.
So, I mean, and stoner rock's never really gone or gotten mainstream. I think has it peaked yet, do you think? Or I think it's probably more popular now, but it's still very much a cult thing compared to getting any kind of media attention.
I think any media attention probably happened in the 90s, right? So we keep talking about Caius. I mean,
yeah,
they were kind of the godfathers of that, desert rock, but it was really
when I think of that stuff, I think of like Sleep and stuff more so than I think of Caius.
I think the biggest hit that any of those bands had ever had would probably be Space Lord by Monster Magnet, which had a lot of MTV airplay. The album was a platinum record for them.
Explain to me why the Church Within by the Obsessed didn't get bigger. That had all the right ingredients.
You get lucky or you don't, but I mean, again, too, it depends on what you're looking for as a band. Some of these guys don't really court the superstar arena type of a vibe. Like some of them would much rather play in the small clubs or play at these, like Shawn was saying, these desert fests or these types of things, that they don't really look for the airplay on mainstream radio. They don't look for that stuff. They're very happy in their little pocket universe doing their thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Clutch is another band. I mean, they're incredibly successful. They sell a lot of records. They sell out shows constantly.
Oh yeah, but
they're not at all mainstream.
In all fairness, neither were any of the bands in the grunge scene. They had no intentions of doing that.
Right, but you go to a Pearl Jam show and they'll sell out a 30,000 seater.
Well, Gary Lee Conner even said, "I've never liked Pearl Jam." So they may be nice people and all. I've just never gotten them. Temple of the Dog too. Much respect to all those involved, but I can't stand that record either.
I think the measure of success is to the individual or the band.
Yeah.
How they do.
But
And
I wasn't saying success. I was saying, like, I don't think that stoner rock or stoner dooms quite had its day in the media
no,
and
it
stuff,
hasn't. Not
and
as
in
far
the
as I'm concerned.
mainstream like grunge did. And grunge didn't want it. So
But yeah, that's a great point. And the funny thing is, there's still a lot of stoner doom bands out there, and new ones popping up all over the place.
yeah.
And they sell records. They sell records on a smaller scale, but you go to a show and there's
It's packed.
a lot of people there. I mean, one of my favorite bands is Cadaver. You can throw them in that category.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Repeats out of fucking Germany,
Yeah.
and
Or look at
anywhere they go, they're selling out.
look at High on Fire. They won a fucking Grammy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, dude? Like, and they blew away bands like Trivium and all these other established metal bands.
Mhm.
And
That
High
was
on
a big
Fire was
win.
the
I
Grammy for
felt
best
proud to
metal.
be part of the scene that day.
Oh,
Like,
it was,
fucking Grammy for Matt Pike. What?
and it's way overdue. And you know what? I'll tell you what, Jeff Maltz, the bass player of that band. I'm friends with him on Facebook. We talk back and forth. And he's a brilliantly talented musician. And I think it's well earned. That
Yeah.
record was great, and it was great to see them get the Grammy. I mean, if you believe in that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of people that don't even believe that those types of awards really mean anything. It's a popularity contest. But
Yeah.
again, it puts a spotlight on the music. And
Agreed.
maybe some new people dig on it, you know.
Yeah.
But again,
I think people like us still just want to hear riff based rock and roll,
yeah.
and these stoner bands are giving us that still.
Yeah.
And I know that's what we try to do. It's like, because you don't hear it anymore. It's
Mhm.
like, you know, when bands in the 90s were trying to do something different, they were coming out of the 80s scene. And one of my things has always been, if you find a good groove, stick with it, because
Yes.
people want to hear it.
Yes.
Fuck yeah. Absolutely.
Well,
And you know what?
everything
That's
got so
really great.
progressively faster and faster and faster and faster. And I remember being, a kid getting into Sabbath because my dad didn't like them and my mom didn't like them. But my dad liked Ozzy Solo. That's another topic for another day. But I was always like, I wish more bands played like this. When I was in high school, I read a book, Sound of the Beast, I think, by Ian Christie or something like that. And there was a whole chapter on doom metal, and it described it. It gave like Trouble Song 9, The Obsessed, The Church Within, St. Vitus Born Too Late. Like, it had a list for starting off. I'm like, fucking hell. So I went on a deep dive and I'm like, oh my God. And ever since, I've been mildly unhealthily obsessed.
But Shawn just said it perfectly. People like us, and why we fell right in with the grunge bands, was because it was finally speaking to people like us that a lot of other music didn't. You know,
Yeah.
The hair metal didn't speak to me.
Yeah,
I mean, there's some
and I think the conscious decision to stop the whole pseudo rock star posing of Robert Plant probably was to do with being the total opposite of what was happening then.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, stage presence is always going to be stage presence, But
Yeah.
my thing was like, and it's again like what Shawn said, it was more about the riff.
It was more about
Like
the music.
in the 80s, everybody ripped off Robert Plant's post glam rock vibe, and they
Fucking
captured
White
that.
Snake.
Right. And then the 90s bands captured more of the sound. They went back to retro, older amplifiers, older guitars. Like, there wasn't the shredders and there wasn't the Jacksons and the Charvel guitars. All of a sudden, everybody was playing Les Pauls again. Everybody was playing SGs. There were tubes. They got rid of the refrigerator racks and they were playing amps again with tubes in them. And it was funny because when I started playing bass, I bought an SVT and an 810 cabinet for like $500 because it was sitting in the corner of Sam Ash and nobody wanted it. because everybody had refrigerator racks. Now they're $2,300-$2,400 because everybody wants them now.
Yeah.
It brought back a more natural and organic vibe to the music. It got rid of the polished, it got rid of the spit shine, if you will,
And
it
brought back the real gritty,
it
the
brought
real
back
shit.
it brought back more of an emotion. Like, why was Guns N' Roses so popular on their first album? Because their
Nobody
content
was doing that at the time, honestly.
but more deeply though, their content was what really seduced people. They talked about stuff that wasn't just like, look at how pretty I am, look at how hot my chick is, look
how fast my car goes.
Right.
And I think the same could be said for Faster Pussycat then as well. They did a lot of songs about, a lot of stuff that, and the same kind of thing. They weren't.
I'll take LA Guns
like
over
Poison
whatever.
at all.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's weird how all that kind of sort of started happening and the shift. Like Appetite for Destruction was 87. And then by 91, nobody cared about that kind of stuff anymore.
So I'll take it. I'll give you a sort of a personal vibe on it. All right. Okay. So you had the 80s bands that put out a lot of music about, chicks and all this type of stuff, whatever. Okay. And it didn't speak to me because I didn't understand that stuff. I wasn't pretty. I didn't have big hair. I didn't have that whole thing, But then when I heard the grunge bands and obviously the 70s stuff that I listened to before that or whatever, when I hear a song like Black by Alice in Chains, by Pearl Jam, or I hear a song like no, hold on, give me a second. When I hear a song like Down in a Hole, when I heard those songs, that spoke to my soul because those were things that I felt. Those are things that I was going through. And this is the connection that you have with music. When you hear someone singing about something that you've been through, then that's where it gets you and that's where it pulls you in. And you're like, holy shit, these guys are talking to me. They've been through what I've been through. I get it, And I think that was a big connection with a lot of people because I think a lot of the music of the 80s, especially the later 80s, as far as hard rock goes, was leaving people behind.
Yeah, it was all about a popularity contest.
Right, it was sort of feeding it off of itself, and then all of a sudden it was like a breath of fresh air came in.
Yeah.
So Andy, we didn't talk about this in the last statement, but in the segment, sorry. Yeah. But Nick writes all the lyrics for us, and
okay.
He brings all his own personal experiences from his work, which is ridiculous what he does. But it's the same kind of thing. It's that the lyrics are speaking to the people. It's not these big fluffy bullshit, he said, she said, or this big love story kind of stuff. Yeah. And so when you go into the whole stoner groove, genre, that's what really everyone's doing, right? They're Black Sabbath said, back in the 60s and 70s where they lived, it wasn't fucking flowers in everyone's hair. We were guys in
get a beer bottle smashed against your head.
We're gonna write about what we know. We know about shit. Stuff.
What did Ozzy say? He goes, they're talking about flowers in their hair and going to California, and I'm in Birmingham. I got no shoes and I'm fucking starving. And, but again, that's a really good point. Like, who's really talking to the people? Like, who's getting the right, or not right, who's getting the message across the right way?
Exactly. We've got a minute and a half left before this is going to kick us off. But wow. I think we covered this really well. I think that there's a lot of similarities, and I think the division and like the whole, oh, I'm a metalhead, I can't like this, and vice versa.
That's ignorant. That's ignorant.
Anybody
who says that is a fool.
Agreed. And they exist, Oh, I can't like grunge because it tried to kill metal. Oh, fuck off.
I love Duran Duran. All right. So, just, and if you don't like Duran Duran and you play bass, I feel bad for you, man.
Absolutely. As a bass player myself too, I started playing bass. I get that. But all right, guys, this has been great. Thank you very much for joining me on this topic. This has been fun. You're welcome back anytime. If you liked it, hit the like button and subscribe. And if you got anything to say, leave a comment. Thanks,
Pitch Black.
Shawn. Thanks, Nick. Take it
Pitch
easy.
Black Sunrise, guys. Check us out everywhere. Bandcamp.
Need a drummer.
I'll put the
Oh, yeah,
links
we
in
do.
and I'll put you need a drummer.
If you're in the Hudson Valley area of Lower New York, reach out to us. We're looking for a family member, man. We're looking for the right guy or girl on the skins. So, look us up. You won't be disappointed.
Until next time, guys, take it easy.